in a dusty manuscript collection in a Cairo library, tucked between more famous works of Islamic scholarship, lies perhaps the most extraordinary mystical text ever committed to paper. Written on scattered scraps by an unknown wandering dervish in 10th century Egypt, it contains something that should be impossible. The direct, unmediated voice of God speaking to a human being across 77 distinct spiritual stations. The author, Muhammad ibn Abd al-Jabbar al-Niffari, deliberately left no trace of himself for posterity, as the earliest biographical note records. Indeed, the Sheikh never composed any book, but he used to write down these revelations on scraps of paper, which were handed down after him. He was a wanderer in deserts and dwelt in no land, neither made himself known to any man. Unlike other Sufi masters who wrote about their spiritual experiences, Al-Niffari claimed to transcribe the actual words of Allah, speaking directly to the seeker's consciousness. Each mawaqif, station, begins with the formula, "He made me stand," and continues with divine speech in the first person. "I said to you," or "my servant." You might wonder whether such claims represent madness, spiritual achievement, or something else entirely. What makes Al-Niffari's Kitab al-Mawaqif so unsettling is its complete lack of human commentary. There are no explanations, no theological frameworks, no attempts to soften the radical implications of what's being claimed. Just the voice that claims to be the divine, speaking with an intimacy and directness that borders on the blasphemous. The great Ibn Arabi, master of esoteric Islam, cited Al-Niffari 5 times in his monumental Futuhat al-Makkiyah, the only external validation this mysterious wanderer ever received. But Ibn Arabi's references carry a warning. Al-Niffari's teachings represent ma'rifah, mystical knowledge, that operates beyond the boundaries of conventional religious understanding. When A.J. Arbery first encountered Al-Niffari's scattered writings in the 1930s, he faced a translator's nightmare. Here was a text consisting entirely of divine monologues addressed to a silent recipient, utterances that claim to originate not from human reflection, but from the source of all reflection itself. The manuscript tradition was fragmentary, preserved only because disciples had gathered the master's scattered papers after his death in approximately 965 CE. The Mawaqif consists of 77 individual stations, each representing a distinct tajalli, divine manifestation, where God holds the seeker in a particular spiritual state while delivering specific knowledge. But this isn't the systematic progression one finds in other mystical texts. These stations follow no logical order, contain no developmental sequence, and offer no graduated path for the aspiring mystic to follow. From Address 7 comes one of the most cryptic divine pronouncements. One thing is, and one thing will be, and one thing will not be. The first is my loving thee, the second thy seeing me, and the third thy ever knowing me with complete gnosis. This statement suggests a mystical hierarchy that reverses conventional assumptions. Divine love exists eternally in the present tense. The vision of God represents a future possibility, but complete ma'rifah, mystical knowledge, is declared impossible, will not be. The implications are staggering. Even the highest mystical achievement falls short of true divine knowledge. The Persian mystic tradition of fana, annihilation, finds its most radical expression in Al-Niffari's station of the sea. He made me stand in the sea, and I saw the ships sinking and the planks floating. Then the planks sank, and he said to me, "Those who voyage are not saved." And he said to me, "Those who cast themselves in and do not voyage take a risk." And he said to me, "In the risk is a portion of salvation." And the wave came and raised what was beneath it and washed over the shore. And he said to me, "The surface of the sea is a gleam that cannot be reached. Its bottom is a darkness that cannot be penetrated. And between the two are great fish that are to be feared." And he said to me, "Do not embark on the sea, lest I veil you with the vessel. And do not cast yourself into it, lest I veil you with it." And he said to me, "The sea has limits, but I am the king." And he said to me, "I have deceived you if I direct you to other than me." And he said to me, "If you perish in other than me, you become what you perished in." And he said to me, "This world belongs to one whom I have turned away from it and turned it away from him. And the next world belongs to one whom I have brought to it and brought it towards me." The allegorical ships represent works of devotion, while planks symbolize even the subtlest spiritual supports. The divine voice explains that all forms of reliance, even upon good works or mystical practices, must eventually be abandoned. Only complete dependence on divine grace remains. This teaching influenced later Sufi doctrine, but Al-Niffari presents it with a starkness that later masters would carefully soften. What makes Al-Niffari's text genuinely esoteric is its claim that conventional religious practice may actually impede the highest spiritual attainment. In one of his most controversial passages, the divine voice declares, "My exoteric revelation does not support my esoteric revelation." This suggests that the outer forms of Islamic law and the inner realities of a mystical experience operate according to different principles. For Al-Niffari, the Gnostic must follow the guidance of direct divine communication rather than the consensus of religious scholars. Such claims would have been considered dangerously heretical by orthodox authorities. Al-Niffari's approach to mystical experience represents a unique technology of consciousness that differs radically from other Sufi methodologies. Rather than systematic practices leading to enlightenment, he describes a series of divine interventions where God unilaterally places the seeker in specific spiritual positions and delivers knowledge that could not be attained through human effort. The technical term mawaqif, station, carries deeper implications than its English translation suggests. In Arabic, the root wqif implies being made to stand, held in position, arrested in motion. The mystic doesn't achieve these stations through spiritual discipline. Rather, he's placed in them by divine action. As the divine voice explains in the Station of Works, "I only made you manifest to make you stand firmly by my attribute, not for your attribute, You do not stand firmly for my attribute, but through my attribute. This passage reveals the fundamental principle underlying Al-Niffari's mysticism. The seeker's spiritual states exist solely through divine attributes, manifesting in human consciousness, not through the cultivation of human spiritual qualities. The mystic becomes a majhar, place of manifestation, rather than an achiever of spiritual attainments. The progression through stations follows what Al-Niffari calls the ilm al-qurb, science of nearness, described as, the least of the sciences of nearness is that you should see in everything the effects of beholding me, and that this vision should prevail over you more than your gnosis of me. This represents a complete inversion of conventional mystical priorities. Rather than accumulating knowledge about God, the advanced practitioner develops a perceptual capacity where divine presence becomes more apparent than conceptual understanding. Every object, thought, and experience becomes an ayah, pointing to divine reality with such intensity that the signs themselves become transparent. Al-Niffari's most sophisticated, technical teaching concerns the relationship between mushahada, witnessing, and ma'rifa, mystical knowledge. Unlike other masters who sought to harmonize these aspects of mystical experience, Al-Niffari presents them as potentially contradictory. The divine voice warns, "If you ask of me and I withhold from you, you return to the asking, not to me, or you return to despair, not to asking." This describes the trap of spiritual materialism, where the seeker's relationship with God becomes mediated by desires for spiritual experiences rather than pure surrender. The technology of the mawaqif appears designed to dissolve such mediation by placing the mystic in positions where all conventional spiritual supports are removed. The method's radical nature becomes clear in Al-Niffari's treatment of zikr, divine remembrance. While other Sufi orders developed elaborate systems of repetitive prayer, Al-Niffari describes a state where remembrance occurs without effort. "When you stand in my knowledge, you speak not save by my speaking, and you are silent not save by my silence." This suggests a condition where individual will dissolve so completely that divine attributes express themselves directly through human faculties. The mystic becomes what Ibn Arabi would later call the insan al-kamil, perfect human, a transparent medium for divine self-disclosure. For practitioners able to stabilize consciousness within Al-Niffari's stations, the text reveals advanced applications that push the boundaries of Islamic mystical thought. The most sophisticated teaching concerns what might be called the doctrine of divine contradictions. The recognition that God's nature transcends human categories of logical consistency. The station of bewilderment introduces this principle. Stand in bewilderment, for bewilderment is my attribute in you. This is a higher order perplexity that arises when consciousness encounters the infinite. Al-Niffari suggests that hayra, bewilderment, represents a divine quality that manifests in human awareness when finite understanding attempts to grasp unlimited reality. Rather than seeking to resolve this bewilderment through study or meditation, the advanced practitioner learns to rest within it as a form of marifa. The practical application involves what Al-Niffari calls waqfat al-ajz, the station of incapacity. When you come to know your incapacity to know me, then you know me. This paradoxical knowledge through unknowing became influential in later Sufi development, but Al-Niffari presents it with a stark immediacy that later masters would elaborate into more systematic teachings. The station of incapacity isn't achieved through negating conceptual knowledge. It arises spontaneously when consciousness recognizes its own limitations in the face of unlimited being. Advanced practitioners report that sustained work with Al-Niffari's stations produces a distinctive form of bast, spiritual expansion, characterized by what he terms ruyat al-ghaib, vision of the unseen. Unlike visionary experiences that reveal specific spiritual content, this involves a gradual transparency of ordinary perception, where the hidden reality underlying apparent phenomena becomes directly accessible. The station of the heart contains perhaps Al-Niffari's most advanced teaching. Your heart is my house, and I will not share my house with other than me. This describes a condition where consciousness becomes completely occupied by divine presence, leaving no space for the ordinary operations of ego, memory, or planning. Practitioners describe this as a form of fana, annihilation, that doesn't involve loss of awareness, but rather the replacement of self-centered awareness with God-centered consciousness. The practical challenge involves learning to function in ordinary life while maintaining this divine occupancy of the heart. Al-Niffari provides no guidance for this integration. His stations describe the mystical states themselves without offering techniques for sustaining them within daily activity. The radical nature of Al-Niffari's claims has generated diverse interpretations across different periods and schools of Islamic mysticism. Each tradition has attempted to reconcile his teachings with their own theological frameworks, often with limited success. Ibn Arabi and his followers represented the first serious attempt to integrate Al-Niffari's teachings within a systematic mystical theology. In the Futuhat al-Makkiyah, Ibn Arabi cites Al-Niffari as an authority on the doctrine of Fana al-Fana, the annihilation of annihilation, using his stations to support the theory of Wahdat al-Wujud, unity of being. The Andalusian interpretation emphasizes Al-Niffari's stations as temporary tajalliyat, divine manifestations, rather than permanent spiritual achievements. Ibn Arabi writes, "The servant in the station receives what the station contains, then moves beyond it to what transcends it." This reading domesticates Al-Niffari's radical claims by embedding them within a developmental framework. However, this interpretation may miss Al-Niffari's more subversive implications. His stations don't appear to follow any logical progression, and many seem to contradict each other. The divine voice declares different and sometimes opposite truths depending on which station the mystic occupies, suggesting a relativistic approach to mystical knowledge that Ibn Arabi's systematic philosophy cannot fully accommodate. Persian Sufi poets, particularly those in the tradition of Hafiz and Sa'adi, found in Al-Niffari a justification for the paradoxical nature of mystical poetry. His stations provided authorization for expressing contradictory spiritual states within the same literary work. The Persian interpretation emphasized the emotional and aesthetic dimensions of Al-Niffari's teachings rather than their theological implications. Hafez's famous line, "In the tavern of ruins, the wine of pre-eternity, we drank before the creation of the vine and grape," echoes Al-Niffari's station of pre-existence. "I loved you before I created love, and I knew you before I created knowledge." The Persian school developed Al-Niffari's insights into a sophisticated aesthetic of mystical paradox, but tended to psychologize his divine communications as expressions of exalted spiritual states rather than literal divine speech. Ottoman religious authorities approached Al-Niffari with considerable suspicion. His claims to direct divine communication bypassed the mediating role of prophetic tradition and scholarly consensus, potentially undermining the authority structure of Islamic civilization. The response involved careful editing of Al-Niffari's texts to emphasize their conformity with orthodox positions. Ottoman manuscripts often include lengthy commentaries explaining how Al-Niffari stations should be understood metaphorically rather than literally. The divine voice becomes a projection of the mystic's own purified consciousness rather than actual divine speech. This theological domestication preserves Al-Niffari's insights while neutralizing their revolutionary implications. However, it may fundamentally misrepresent his intentions. The power of the mawaqif lies precisely in its claim to transcend human interpretation through direct divine authorization. Contemporary scholars have approached Al-Niffari through various interpretive frameworks. Psychological readings emphasize his descriptions of altered states of consciousness. Literary scholars focus on his innovative use of divine speech as a narrative device. Comparative mystics find parallels with visionary traditions in other religious cultures. A J.R. Berry's translation, while scholarly rigorous, tends to emphasize Al-Niffari's literary achievement rather than his claims to mystical authority. This academic approach makes the text accessible to non-Muslim readers, but may obscure its function within Islamic spiritual practice. The phenomenological approach, influenced by Henry Corbin's work on Islamic mysticism, attempts to take Al-Niffari's claims seriously as descriptions of genuine spiritual experiences without making judgments about their ultimate validity. This methodology preserves the text's power while acknowledging the impossibility of verifying mystical claims through rational investigation. What makes Al-Niffari's Kitab al-Mawaqif uniquely relevant for contemporary seekers is its complete independence from cultural and historical conditions. Unlike other mystical texts that require extensive background knowledge to understand, Al-Niffari's stations speak directly to consciousness itself. The voice that claims to be divine addresses the eternal human situation rather than the specific circumstances of 10th century Islamic civilization. Perhaps this explains why Al-Niffari chose the life of an unknown wanderer rather than establishing a formal teaching order. His insights resist institutionalization precisely because they bypass the normal mechanisms through which spiritual knowledge is transmitted. The mawaqif function as portals rather than teachings, each station offering direct access to the spiritual reality it describes rather than information about that reality. The text's contemporary relevance lies in its radical deconstruction of spiritual materialism. In an age where mystical experiences have become commodified and spiritual achievements have become ego-enhancing acquisitions, Al-Niffari's stations offer a devastating critique of the seeker's fundamental assumptions. The divine voice repeatedly undermines every form of spiritual security, including reliance on mystical experiences themselves. As the Station of Realities declares, "When you come to me through your reality, I veil you from me by your reality. When you come to me through my reality, I show you your reality in my reality." This suggests that even authentic mystical attainment becomes a barrier if the mystic claims ownership of spiritual states. Only through complete attribution of all experiences to divine action does the path remain clear. The ultimate teaching embedded within Al-Niffari's scattered papers may be that the deepest mystical knowledge cannot be systematized, transmitted, or even properly understood. It can only be received directly from its source in moments of grace that arrive according to divine rather than human timing. The 77 stations represent not a curriculum to be mastered, but invitations to surrender that remain perpetually available to any consciousness willing to be positioned by forces beyond its control. In our current historical moment, when ancient wisdom traditions encounter postmodern skepticism and spiritual seeking often becomes another form of consumerism, Al-Niffari's radical claims offer something increasingly rare, a mystical teaching that cannot be domesticated, packaged, or safely contained within human institutions. The voice that speaks through his stations demands nothing less than the complete transformation of the seeker's relationship to existence itself. These teachings survive in scattered manuscripts across European and Egyptian libraries, the earliest copied just 2 centuries after Al-Niffari's death, one of the most extraordinary documents of mystical literature from the classical Islamic period. The letter does not know me. The intellect does not know me. Gnosis does not know me. Sincerity does not know me. All bliss does not know me. All torment does not know me. When I say to you, stand for me, not for yourself, not for your surroundings, not for what you know from me, not for what you do not know from me, but I look at you and you look at me.